Hello everybody and welcome back to Dollar Tree Dinners. My name is Rebecca and this was my second week of my $50 Walmart meal plan for two. Now I've done several of these series, but this was my first time rolling over the leftover ingredients to continue this second week. And hopefully this just gives you some ideas of how you can use what you already have on hand to help make a menu, which is the first step to saving money on groceries: research. And it is the least fun part of it, but luckily enough, at least for this week and last week, I've already done the legwork for you. When it comes to making a menu, it's easy to just pick out a random handful of recipes, but that will not only be expensive, but you may find yourself wasting food if you don't end up using those ingredients in future meals. So what I like to do is I start with one recipe that sounds good to me, and I really think about the ingredients I'll need to buy to make that individual meal, specifically what I might not use up entirely. As you're building your meal plan, try to structure it in a way that ingredients overlap between meals. A couple of examples of this week I made a ravioli lasagna, but I also made an unstuffed pepper skillet, both of which needed ingredients like pasta sauce. So I was able to buy 1 jar of pasta sauce and split that between those two meals. I also needed tomatoes to make the unstuffed pepper skillet, but rather than just buying a can of diced tomatoes specifically to make the unstuffed pepper skillet, I bought a pound of Roma tomatoes for about the same price as 1 can of tomatoes would have cost, which then funneled into making a black bean salsa for some tacos and burrito bowls. And I think ultimately this is why shopping on a budget is challenging, particularly if you're new to cooking and you don't yet have a base knowledge on what meals you like, an understanding of reading recipes and knowing what can be omitted out of a recipe and it still tastes good, or what cheaper ingredient alternatives there are, and so on. Considering this was my second week, I did have some leftover ingredients to work with. Namely, I had milk, bread, a handful of potatoes, some rice, and some onions. Looking at those ingredients, I felt like it was easier to work those into my breakfast for the week. We of course cannot forget about the rollover coffee and creamer too, because I like to not only consider food, but quality of life and happiness. So what did I buy with my $50 on the second week? Well, first of all, last week we had a lot of chicken. So this week I challenged myself to not buy any chicken. So I went into Walmart with my grocery list and my meal plan in hand, but even with all of my diligence and planning, I do usually make some last minute changes as I shop. If you're trying to stick to a budget, then you should take the time to weigh your produce. It'll give you a fairly accurate idea of how much it will cost. Just take the weight and multiply it by the price per pound. I got 5 Roma tomatoes for $1.16. Some produce isn't a per pound cost, but a per item cost, like bell peppers. Try to find the biggest ones you can in these cases. I got 3 large bell peppers for $2.58. I also got a single large jalapeno for 32 cents, 2 limes for 50 cents. When it comes to items like tortillas, check the package sizes, and you can usually find tortillas in multiple places across the store, which can make finding the best price challenging. These great value tortillas are in the bakery department, and the fajita tortillas are the best value at $1.98. I got 18 eggs last week for $3.48, but this week they were $4.14. So if you're shopping every 2 weeks, you could save a little by buying 36 eggs at a time. For those who don't like margarine, then just budget in butter. You can even buy just 2 sticks now, but margarine is $1.43 per pound. Shredded cheese for $2.22, smoked sausage for $2.98, ground turkey for $3.82, a can of corn for 64 cents, a can of black beans for 82 cents, a can of beef broth for 72 cents, a jar of pasta sauce for $2.38. I do pay a little more for pasta sauce with Italian sausage already in it. Cheese ravioli for $4.27, family-sized red beans and rice for $2.74. Taco seasoning for 57 cents, gravy mix for 48 cents, frozen peas and carrots for 98 cents, and potatoes went up in price this week, so I just got instant mashed potatoes for 98 cents. Egg noodles for $1.48, strawberry yogurt for $2.36, a family-sized cream of mushroom soup for $1.64, canned tuna for $2.16, frozen peas for 98 cents, frozen strawberries for $2.24, and I also think you should try to budget in a snack or a treat. I thought these peanut butter cookie brownies sounded great, and they were $2.42. They didn't need a lot of ingredients to prepare them. So this all came out to $48.99 pre-tax. 13 state charge tax on unprepared food, so if you have to pay tax, then you really have 2 options of budgeting for that. First is to reduce your grocery budget according to your tax rate. So in Virginia, they charge 1%. If I had $50 to spend on groceries, then I'd really have to spend $49.50 to make sure I come in under $50 after tax. The second is to base your grocery budget on your tax. So let's say I want to spend $50 on food, but I know that's going to cost $50.50 after tax, so that's what I have to work with. Time to get into the prep and the meals now. The prep this week is very minimal. I did finally dice 2 onions and 2 peppers to keep in the fridge to use throughout the week. I also prepared the cookie brownies to snack on throughout the week. And this isn't necessarily a designated prep step, but throughout the week as you're prepping and cooking, think ahead to whatever else you might want to make later on. As I was cooking, I was setting aside small portions of things like chopped vegetables, meats, sauces, etc. to use in future meals. This way you avoid potentially using something that you needed for another recipe. Here are the 7 breakfasts that I made this week. First, we have hash browns with fried eggs. I washed and grated 3 of my remaining potatoes. Set the grated potatoes in a bowl of cold water and change the water about 3 times until it was mostly clear. Set this aside until you're ready to fry them up. Into a skillet, I added 2 tablespoons of margarine and 2 tablespoons of oil. I get asked a lot about why I use both, and the reason is that the margarine or butter provides the flavor, but it doesn't really get as crispy, whereas oil doesn't have flavor, but it does make the potatoes really crispy. It's called a combination of fats, and it's a really great cooking technique for when you want something to taste buttery, but you also want it to have a nice crispy texture. Let this preheat until it's sizzling and frothy, and then add a couple of handfuls of diced peppers and onions. Saute these briefly, and then add your well-drained shredded potatoes. Toss this together to coat in the oil mixture and then let it crisp and fry up undisturbed for 8 minutes. Then flip them and let them fry for another 6 to 8 minutes on the other side. Hash browns do better if you don't move them around too much, just kind of let the skillet do the work for you. Split this between 2 bowls and then I fried up 4 eggs and I topped each bowl with 2 fried eggs. If you have some ketchup or hot sauce or even some cheese, that would be amazing on this. Next we have French toast, and now this is a really basic French toast because I'm only using ingredients that I purchased specifically as part of this meal plan, but I'm also going to share my usual French toast recipe because while I don't assume that you already have things like brown sugar, cinnamon, and vanilla on hand, if you do have those items, it'll only make this better. Take 6 slices of sandwich bread and set those out on a sheet pan to dry overnight. Mix 2 eggs with 1 cup of milk, and my optional additions are 3 tablespoons of brown sugar, 1 teaspoon of vanilla, and a half teaspoon of cinnamon. Preheat a skillet over medium to medium-low heat with margarine. Dunk each dry piece of bread in the egg mixture for 10 seconds, then flip it and let it soak for another 8 to 10 seconds. Fry this in the skillet for 2 to 3 minutes per side or until it's as brown as you like it. For the topping here, we're using the frozen strawberries. Just thaw them and mash them and pour it over top, or you can use syrup if you have that on hand. Breakfast number 3 is a fruit and yogurt parfait. I had 2 packets of apples and cinnamon instant oatmeal left over from last week, so into a small skillet, melt 2 tablespoons of margarine, add the instant oatmeal to the skillet. Continuously move the oatmeal and allow it to toast for 5 minutes, then transfer it onto a plate or a bowl to cool completely. It will crisp up as it cools. Prepare 2 bowls with the yogurt and the thawed strawberries and top with the granola, and there's enough of everything to have this breakfast twice. For the next breakfast, you can either choose to repeat the French toast again, or an alternative to the French toast is the strata. A strata is a savory egg casserole made with bread. I took the remaining 5 to 6 slices of bread along with the ends and cut those into 1/2-inch cubes. Into a skillet, I added 2 tablespoons of oil and a half stick of margarine, and this looks like a lot, but the bread will soak it right up. If desired, add some peppers and onions and saute those briefly. If you have some sausage or bacon, you can also add that in as well. Add the bread cubes and let these toast up for 5 to 6 minutes, stirring occasionally. Scramble 4 eggs with 1 cup of milk and season this well with salt and pepper. Remove your skillet from the stovetop and pour the egg mixture over top of your toasted bread cubes. Bake this at 350 degrees for 30 to 35 minutes or until golden brown on top. Slice this and serve, and it would be great with some syrup or gravy. Breakfast 5 has some Tex-Mex flavors. During the dinner portion, I'll be sharing a recipe for this black bean salsa. I scrambled 4 eggs and I toasted 4 tortillas on the skillet, and then I essentially just made breakfast tacos with the eggs and the black bean salsa. I do the salsa cold on top of the cooked eggs, but if you wanted to, you could cook the salsa in with the eggs or have them separately like I did. Breakfast 6 is another scenario in which you can kind of choose if you just want to make hash browns and fried eggs again, but I made a breakfast scramble. At this point, I had 3 small potatoes left from last week, which I washed and diced. I fried those in a mixture of oil and margarine for 12 minutes until golden brown, stirring occasionally. At the end of cooking, I added in some diced onion, diced smoked sausage, and then I cracked and scrambled my last 3 eggs. I poured my eggs into my hash and scrambled it all together. I also serve this on tortillas as breakfast tacos, which is a great way to stretch this into a couple of extra servings. I had plenty of leftovers to have this twice as well, and this would also make a really good option if you wanted to do breakfast for dinner on one of the days. That wraps up the breakfast. Now on to lunches and dinners. Just like last week, I kept the dinners very simple, and as usual, each dinner that I made was at least 4 servings, so any leftovers can be saved for a quick and easy lunch the following day. One thing that you'll see me do when I'm trying to make the most of a small budget is that I portion my food immediately after cooking it. I plate it onto 2 plates and then I go ahead and set aside 2 portions for lunch. But if you ever find that the servings just aren't quite big enough for you or your partner, then you can stretch the portions by adding cheap fillers. Things that are extremely cheap like bananas, bread, rice, or even instant noodles to serve as an emergency belly filler. You can also go to Dollar Tree for some very cheap snacks, and a few that I really enjoy are the 1-pound sleeves of cookies, the giant bag of cheese balls, and any of the bagged popcorn. This might add a few dollars, but it can make a big difference. Dinner 1 is red beans and rice. This is a one-pot meal that's really easy to put together, but incredibly flavor-packed. For this one, you'll need smoked sausage, the family-size box of red beans and rice, and our diced peppers and onions. I started by dicing my smoked sausage. This package comes with 6 links, but I did set aside one of the links, which is what I used for the breakfast hash. Into a pot, I sauteed some diced peppers and onions along with my smoked sausage for just a few minutes until the onions started to soften. Then add the red beans and rice mix and saute this together for a couple of minutes before adding 4.5 cups of water. Bring this to a boil, then cover and simmer for 25 to 30 minutes, stopping to stir occasionally. And one way you can make the portions on this bigger would be to add an extra half cup of white rice, an extra 1 cup of water, and an extra can of drained kidney beans just prior to the boil then simmer step. This will dilute down the flavor slightly, but it shouldn't be noticeable, and you'll get a couple of extra servings out of it. Dinner 2 is a ravioli lasagna. Starting off with a jar of pasta sauce. This is the one with Italian sausage already in it. I set aside 1 cup of the sauce for a future meal. Then I sauteed some diced peppers and onions until softened. I added the rest of my pasta sauce. To get all of the sauce out of the jar, just add some water to the jar and shake it around. Into a baking dish. This is a 7x9, but you can use any baking dish that you have. Put some sauce in the bottom and then begin layering your ravioli. Thawed ravioli works best in my experience, but you can make it from frozen. If you want to sprinkle a little bit of cheese between each layer, feel free to do so. I added the sauce pretty lightly between each layer, and then I poured the rest of the sauce over top along with a good sprinkle of cheese. Cover this with foil and bake at 350 for 45 to 55 minutes. In the last 15 minutes, remove the foil so the cheese can start to brown. Let it rest for 10 minutes prior to cutting and serving. You can bulk out this meal with some garlic bread or some bread and butter if desired. Up next, we have black bean salsa tacos. This is a meatless meal, but if you have chicken or beef, feel free to add some to it. First, we have to make the black bean salsa, which is better if you do make it a few hours in advance. Into a large bowl, add a can of rinsed and drained black beans along with a can of drained corn. Seed and dice 1 jalapeno, or you can leave this out if you prefer a more mild salsa. I also added some of the diced peppers and onions into the salsa, just a few spoonfuls. Dice 3 Roma tomatoes and then add those in along with the juice of 2 limes. Season this pretty well with salt and stir it. Taste it. If it's bland, add a little bit more salt. The salt is what really brings out the flavors. Then cover this and set it in the fridge for up to 3 to 5 days. Then once this black bean salsa is prepared, this dinner comes together fairly quickly. I made a simple taco rice, which you can do on the stovetop or in the rice cooker. All it is 1 cup of white rice, 2 cups of water, and 1 packet of taco seasoning. I did also add some sauteed peppers and onions to it, but this is optional. Now, when I'm cooking rice on the stovetop, I prefer to saute the rice rather than rinsing it. I find that this method gets me the most consistent rice that isn't gummy. However, when I make it in a rice cooker, I do rinse it a few times. Once your rice is cooked, we're just going to serve the rice and the salsa on some tortillas, and you can also add some shredded cheese. Dinner 4 is a really simple version of a shepherd's pie. I browned 1 pound of ground turkey, and once it was well browned, I set aside a quarter of that to use for a future meal. Then I added in my bag of frozen carrots and peas, 1 cup of water, and the packet of brown gravy mix. Just let this cook together until the gravy is well thickened. You can season this mixture with salt and pepper. If you buy flavored instant mashed potatoes, then this potato topping is very simple, just a packet of potatoes and 2 cups of boiling water. Alternatively, you can make the mashed potatoes from scratch. I demonstrated that in week 1, or another option is to buy unflavored potato flakes that come in a box and prepare those. With those, you have to add things like milk, butter, and seasonings, but they are a little bit more cost effective than the packets long term. Pour the prepared meat base into a baking dish and top with mashed potatoes. Spread the potatoes out into an even layer, and you can use a spoon or a fork to give it a rustic texture. Bake this at 350 degrees for 20 to 25 minutes or until the top is lightly browned, and allow this to cool for 5 to 10 minutes before serving. Dinner 5 is one of our household favorites, unstuffed pepper skillet, which has all the flavors of stuffed peppers with just a little bit less work. Start by dicing 1 whole bell pepper and 1 whole onion, but we're only using half the onion in this dish. I used the other half when I made the breakfast scramble. You will also dice the remaining 2 Roma tomatoes. Into a skillet, add the small amount of ground turkey that we set aside from the shepherd's pie, along with the chopped peppers and onions and 1 cup of white rice. Saute these together for 2 to 3 minutes, then add 1 can of beef broth, the 1 cup of pasta sauce that we set aside from the ravioli lasagna, our diced tomatoes, and season this well with salt and pepper. Give it a stir and bring it up to a boil, then cover and simmer for 15 minutes. Turn off the heat and let it rest for 10 minutes, then remove the lid, top with shredded cheese, and put the lid back on for the last 5 minutes or so to allow the cheese to melt. Dinner 6 is a tuna noodle casserole, but I know that not everyone enjoys that, so I'm going to give you 2 options as we go through this dish. The second dish is a nearly identical version, but it's a chicken pot pie variation instead of tuna noodle casserole. Into a large pot, add 1 bag of frozen peas. For the pot pie version, you'll do mixed vegetables. Then add 1 family-sized can of cream of mushroom soup, or for the pot pie version, you'll use a family-sized can of cream of chicken soup. Add 1 can of water and a half can of milk. Season this mixture pretty well with salt and pepper, and then stir in 1 pound of wide egg noodles and bring this up to a boil. Cover and simmer this for 10 minutes, stirring occasionally. At the end of cooking, stir in 12 ounces of drained tuna, or you can do chicken. For the chicken version, you could do canned chicken, or you could try to set aside a small amount of shredded chicken from the quarters that we shredded in week 1. The choice is yours. But this makes a total of 6 really large servings. So just like last week, I incorporated some extra servings of things to potentially serve as dinner on the 7th day, but I do recommend taking a physical and mental break from cooking and treating yourself to a dinner out if you can on the 7th day. This can be as simple as just grabbing a frozen pizza. But I do hope you guys enjoyed this 2-week Walmart budget series. Just like last week, I have the printables available for purchase on Etsy, but again, all of the information in this video is available to you for free. I hope you are having a fantastic day, and I will see you again soon.